Good afternoon. Hi, everybody out there. And I wanted to start this particular interview of Magnifying Our Impact by introducing a great friend of mine. And also, he won't like this. He won't like this introduction because he's to me, he's an extremely humble person. Chris is very humble compared to the enormity of what he's achieved in his life, in my book. But Chris has also been an enormous supporter of me, of our work in Africa. And, you know, I often ask his advice and his opinion as to how to do things, how things work, particularly in the world of entrepreneurship and philanthropy. And so it's a real pleasure to introduce Chris Morling to you all out there. And it's great to have Chris with us for a number of reasons, which, providing you're willing to stay with us on this video, I think you'll find this interview inspiring, because what Chris, again, far too modest of what he's done, but what he's created, particularly in the United Kingdom, is an enormous amount of success. But I think what's been so impressive, besides the numbers and you know, the scale at which Chris has managed to help the world through his businesses, I think what's very impressive is when I've had the opportunity to be with his team and to talk to people that have worked with Chris, is, you know, often out there you hear about good bosses and great bosses and people that look after each other. I think you'll find out that Chris's values are steeped in not only being very well-rounded and steeped in his values that he believes are important in his life, but also the way in which, Chris, you look after other people that you work with and surround yourself with in your life. So it's great to have this conversation, particularly today, about how we can create positive impact in the world. And I'm very much looking forward to talking to you about this. So with no further ado, I wanted to ask Chris if you could just introduce yourself for a couple of minutes as to your background, and then I can ask you some great questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Craig. And thank you for the very generous introduction. Much appreciated. I'm not sure I would phrase it quite like that, but I'll take it. So yeah, well, brief introduction. Well, my background originally was in IT. So I was a developer for many years, worked in several different businesses, including Oracle, before setting up on my own, which was 20 years ago, and created my first website, Finance Link. Went through a whole series of different business models within that company, and finally settled on a financial comparison site, which is money.co.uk, which I went on to develop with a very smart team, and we sold a couple of years ago. But during that process, you know, we didn't just focus on what we were delivering to the consumer, but also had a real close eye on making sure that everybody in my team was, you know, enjoying what they were doing, felt fulfilled, and we were adding additional value, you know, things like allowing them to, you know, have X thousand pounds to donate to a charity of their choice each year. That sort of thing, really important to me. And then the last 18 months, I've been on a new project, which is Study, STUDEE, and we helped international students around the world find, apply, and enroll at universities all around the world. So really exciting, not only to be in a new industry, fresh start, fresh challenges, but I'm now working with a friend, business partner, Simon. So yeah, loving it, loving all the new challenges that's bringing. Not without its headaches, but it's all good.
Thank you very much, Chris. And my first question is, I feel very well placed, because when I ask you guys for a background or where you've come from, traditionally, obviously, you've given us an idea of your background from a commercial perspective. But if I start by going even further back in your life, you know, I talk a lot to audiences, as you know, and I talk a lot to people about childlike energy. And I think one of the things that we share is, you know, we love to be kids and play and enjoy and make sure the environment's conducive to people to be creative and use their imagination. And it's interesting to have this debate, which I know that you've probably had a lot, which is nature nurture is. how much of this do we have when we're born from our folks and, you know, as we've evolved as human beings, and how much is actually learned? So what's genetic and what's environmental? And so my first question is around when you were a kid, as far back as you can remember, what were your dreams and aspirations? If you take yourself even back to an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, how did you look at the world, and what was your dream or your ambition or your goal? Or what did you see as your future?
If, if I'm being honest, I didn't. You know, I'm being brutally honest about it.
Yeah.
I just didn't really think about things like that. I mean, my family, my parents were quite active in terms of working with charities. So I had a really strong awareness of, you know, the inequality in the world, etc. And I got involved with that and cared about that. But I didn't really think about the future, either for myself or for the planet. And I reckon that was true all the way through till I was probably late 20s, if I'm being honest. You know, even when I was working my early career, life was about go to work, have fun with your mates, rinse and repeat. You know, I reflect back and I think, oh my God, all that wasted time I spent in the pub. You know, I didn't pick up a new instrument. I didn't read books like I do now. I didn't do anything really what I would say is creative or constructive. You know, part of me feels like, did I waste that time? I mean, I've got three kids, teenagers, 13, 14, 16. So, I mean, with that in mind, one thing I'm really keen to instill in them is not to plan their life out right now.
No.
But to at least think about it, you know, and as they get older, I'll probably be throwing these questions at them more and more to sort of chew over what do I want? Because I think it's the biggest mistake we all make is we jump on this treadmill, whatever the treadmill looks like for us. And we suddenly years down the line, you kind of think, oh my God, you know, what have I done? Or why aren't I where I want to be? And it's because we haven't thought about where we want to be. And we don't make plans and we don't think ahead. And I think that's the biggest gift I can give them is to help them think like that. And even if they don't have all the answers now, which they won't, it doesn't matter. But always be mindful of thinking, what do I want? What do I want out of life? What do I want to achieve? And what am I going to do about it to get there? You know, and I don't need to I wouldn't make it regimental, but this is something I felt I missed out on up until the late 20s. But with awareness, I think youngsters, can do so much more just having that at the forefront. And I think social media helps because all these things are more prevalent and more obvious to them, and much more than when we were kids.
Yeah. And so I know that looking back, I believe that we have moments, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 moments that are really key. And some people believe that they just happen, and there's really key important moments where we say yes or no, or I'm stopping this and I'm starting this, or I do or I don't, or whatever. There's a number of moments that are really key, salient points in our life that make a big difference. Whether they just appear or whether those moments don't exist and we build them like building blocks through everything that we do, and then it comes to a crossroads, whatever that be the case, when you look back at the last 20 years, what do you think are the 3 most important moments or 3 most important things that have made you successful? I know there's loads of stuff, your drive and everything else, but are there 2 or 3 really key moments or times or decisions that you've made that have really supported your sense of success?
Perhaps I can just kick off answering that by not answering it, but kind of just asking the question, what is success? Because
yes,
this is something I ask in interviews a lot. One of my favorite questions, and I try to get to understand what an interviewee thinks success is, not by asking them directly, but I just ask them, do you think you're successful? And some will respond by saying, can you just what do you mean by success? You're talking about my work, you're talking about my social life, what do you mean? I said, well, interpret it as you wish. But most people just jump to that immediate assumption, oh, it's either about money or it's about status in some way.
Right.
And that is so common. But I mean, for me, success is, it's not about that. It's about achieving what you set out to achieve, you know, and enjoying it in the process. And if you do that, then you're successful. It's got nothing to do with money. It's got nothing to do with status or climbing the corporate ladder. So with that sort of caveat in mind, to answer your question,
Yeah.
and assuming the question is based around, you know, building my business, building a business where I feel that the employees were happy, you know, and we're adding hopefully value to millions of people. I'd say number one is, well, the biggest instigator was employing brilliant people, basically. I know that's not really necessarily a moment, but I mean, a great team is the building block, you know, is the engine of any successful company.
Yeah.
And you very quickly realize when you run a business that, you know, that the best thing you can do is employ people who are way more intelligent and experienced than yourself. And there's plenty of those around. But then you've got to really work at keeping those brilliant people, you know, and you've got to give a lot of thought and effort into, you know, the company culture, how you work, how you develop and improve those employees' skills. So it's not something you can just sit back on. I think it was sorry, what's the question around pivotal moments?
Well, I mean, really, what's really insightful, and you've already answered a lot of this, is what makes you successful in your life, and you know, what are the three things? What are the three things or three moments? So I didn't phrase it perfectly in that. What do you feel are the three things that make you most successful? You're absolutely right. They may not be moments. They may be hiring the right people. And
I think on a personal level, okay, I don't, as you know, I don't like talking about myself very much, but I think one of the characteristics that has helped me is I do think I have both an analytical and creative mind, which it's not that unusual, but I do feel that I have an ability to come up with innovative ideas, you know, piece together unusual things to create something new, but then also create a plan and then execute on that plan. You know, I think because I had such a small team for so many years, you know, when I started my business, it was 2 years before I employed anyone. And then in the following 2 years after that, I only had 2 employees. So like most people, when they start their business for the first time, you have to do everything, right?
yes,
So, you know, everything from the technical, marketing, sales, negotiation, contract review, office management, design, UX, customer feedback, support, all that stuff I had to do myself. And I think when you do that, it means you're able to have better conversations with your team when you grow your team, and also truly appreciate the challenges that those team members face, because you can wrap your head around the problems through personal experience and not just what you've read on paper. And I truly think that makes a big difference. And then the last one is the thing that springs to mind, and it is probably not very original from a leadership perspective, but I do think determination and drive are key. Yeah. You know, it's a very typical characteristic of a leader, an entrepreneur, if you like. But when you lead a business, this isn't necessarily true, but it feels like you spend half your time on strategy, on organizing and facilitating, and then 50% on sorting out problems and issues, you know, whether in the business, on the business, helping individuals with their own personal challenges. So, you know, it's not easy. It can be really relentless. And you have to have the strength of mind to keep going and keep pushing. But I mean, but that said, I would say that you have to combine that with a winning business model and not be blinkered by a bad idea. and heading off in the wrong direction, and not having the awareness of knowing when to change direction, change your mind. You know.
Yes.
A story of a friend of mine springs to mind where he when I met him, he'd been working on this new business, new to me. He'd been working on it for 7 years, and he hadn't really broken through. He was still supporting himself financially with a proper job, you know, a 9-to-5 job. And he kept pushing. And I said to him, look, I just don't feel this model you've got is going to work. But he kept going and he kept pushing. And 3 years later, he gave up. But had he had the foresight to take a step back and kind of think, right, how can I tweak this to make this work? He might have had a successful business on his hand, but he was so blinkered, and he was so, I think he'd invested so much passion and energy into this thing that he wanted to bring to the world.
Yeah.
He just couldn't bear to let half of it go and almost start fresh or to tweak it. You know, and you see it on programs like Dragon's Den all the time, you know.
Sure.
Obviously bad ideas, and people don't want to let go because they're emotionally invested. Yes.
So there's some great value in what you've shared in those 3 different elements, and I wanted to pick up and drill down a little bit further, if I may, into those areas. And I wanted to start that with looking at the mixture that I think is probably relatively unusual, in fact, as you adhered to, which is to have an analytical and a creative mind. And, you know, that's a real gift. For me, you know, I'm much more on the emotional spectrum, I feel, than the analytical side. So I can really understand the sense of creativity and imagination, but to have both in abundance and really to be able to merge the two in a way that creates a creative product, and to combine that with what the market needs at any given time, that you've just given an example to. You know, if we were to ask you, how do you do that? I know that, you know, there's a lot to it. There's a lot. You can't just give me a 2-minute answer as to how, you know, an analytical and creative mind blends. But
I think you can do things to help support creativity and analytical ability. I mean, one of them is giving yourself the space and time. You know, being creative is not necessarily something you can just sit down and do when everything else is going on around you. You've got to take a sort of a bit of a breather, I think, and just give yourself space to explore different ideas. And I think if you're that way inclined, then you continue to think about those things as you go about your everyday task. You know, I mean, a number of people say, I came up with an amazing idea in the shower. I think it's because your mind is free to wander. So the trick is to cram in some ideas at some point, so that your subconscious mind can almost start playing with it and throw stuff to you at a later date. That's powerful. It's a bit of a combination of give yourself some time, but give yourself a starting point of knowledge to feed that creativity on. Right.
Yeah. It reminds me of 2 very quick stories that I have. As one, Tony Geartier, an old friend of mine, he used to spend 90% of his time as a CEO in other competitors' bakeries. He owned a lot of bakeries, and he just used to watch what they do and just take a paper and pen and write ideas and wander around and just, you know, use that strategic time. And the second element that really comes to me is, I know that some of the best comedians in the world, they tell us about real life, don't they? So they must spend their whole life wandering around shopping centres looking at our behaviour. And so that's really valuable, that give ourselves time and space to be able to fill our minds with the creative building blocks for that to filter through when our brain is ready to take on those ideas.
And then also, make a note when you get that idea, because it's scary how often you have a great idea, and you forget it. And you knew that you had an idea, but you can't.
You can't remember what the idea is.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So I mean, I use Evernote for that. There's 1,001 ways of doing it, but make a note when you have an idea.
Yeah, that's really valuable. And so you talked about bringing people in that are better than us at what they do, and surround yourself with brilliant people, which is obviously an enormous piece of being good at a sport, a musical instrument, right? Whatever is who you surround yourself with, you become, and you develop that. But can you drill down a bit more into what, because you are very, very good at this, is what is your advice? And I think for non-profit organizations right now, this is right high up on their list for all of us in that want to make change in the world, is give us some advice as to what creates a winning culture. What do you do? You mentioned a few things earlier, like look after people and make sure they're happy, and interview them in the right way. But can you drill down in those, or give us some more ideas as to what creates a winning culture?
I think you can probably distill it to one key element. I know there's lots and lots of things involved, but for me, it's about trust, right? And this manifests itself in many, many different ways. So, for example, I think you need to build a culture where your team feels comfortable to make mistakes, for example.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking through lack of care or attention. I'm talking about experimenting, trial and error, pushing things forward with new ideas, knowing that if something doesn't work, they won't get lambasted or punished or humiliated in any way. I think that's really, really key. But I think one of the most valuable things you can have within a team is trust between the team members, because I think out of everything, this is the one thing that I strive for most in a business, because if you can have a team that trusts each other, then you can have honest conversations all the time. Honest conversations about what's not working, what are you doing that's pissing me off? These conversations become possible without an undercurrent of, oh, you're trying to belittle me, or you're trying to score points. Yeah. If you trust each other, then all those conversations are focused on, okay, this is to try and help me become better at what I do. It becomes constructive feedback that helps us all. There's a approach used in agile development, and I'm sure in lots and lots of other methodologies, retrospectives, where you dedicate time every 2 weeks, every week, every 4 weeks, for a team to sit down, review what they've done well, but equally what they've not done so well. So what can they improve in the future? And those discussions are a complete nightmare if you have a team that don't trust each other, because it just becomes a slanging match, and people get very defensive and you get nowhere. Whereas if you trust each other, those conversations are absolute magic, because within minutes you can have a set of action points which can go away, action within hours or weeks, and improve what you're doing immediately. It's incredible. And I also think if building trust can help, it can really understand people within your team, because at the end of the day, we all think differently, right? We all have different worldviews, and if you say the same thing to a group of people, it's going to be interpreted in 4 or 5 different ways, and unless it's a legal document, in which case nobody will listen, and so nobody will get it. But we just interpret things differently, and tuning in to how other people in your team are thinking, I think, is really, really helpful. I mean, when I was at Money, we asked everybody to complete a DISC profile. So it's one of these kind of personality analysis tools that just helps you understand what makes other people tick and how they think. And my personality traits came back saying that, I'm very analytical. I love to understand the detail. I love to ask questions. And I had multiple people come back to me and they said, that's really interesting, Chris. But I always thought you were being critical or didn't trust us because you asked us all those questions all the time. Right. And I was like, I'm so sorry. No, not at all. I just love digging in. I just love to understand how it all works. So little things like that can make all the difference. And then I guess the last thing on trust is you've got to trust your team to do their job, right? I mean, it's your job as a leader to set the direction, let everybody understand where we're heading, what the business objectives are. But in terms of how we get there and the tactics, you've got to leave that to your team, and in order to do that, you've got to be able to trust that they will deliver on that. So yeah, trust.
No, that's huge. That's listening to that, it resonates in so many different levels. And I feel as we go through this interview, and I knew and know this is happening, is that I can ask you more and more and more and more of the questions to get deeper and deeper. But I just want to stay here for just 2 more minutes and just ask you this is, if you're already in a situation, so say, for example, there's a lady or gentleman listening that has a team and they're running a non-for-profit organization somewhere in the world, and they've just taken over a team which has been running for 6 months, 6 years, 16 years, and there's a real problem with trust. And the thing is falling apart, or they're not getting enough resources, or they're wasting resources, or whatever it is. How have you, because you must have had these challenges along your way, how do you take a situation of a lack of trust and rebuild it, or stamp it out, or eradicate it? You've had the enormous amount of hard work in having to build it from scratch, which in a way is a privilege because your values are so strong. But how do you do it when you've inherited something which is falling apart? How do you get the trust back?
Yeah, I think it's a big question, but I think step one is you need to understand what the issues are, right? I mean, you've got to ask questions. You've got to learn, what are the things that are causing a problem in the business? But then more importantly, what are the concerns and issues that each individual in that team has? Because once you understand that, then you can start to piece together a plan that addresses all those issues. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, you can only address an issue, whatever it is, through conversations, right? That's how any problem is addressed. I know you can throw money at a problem, whatever, to sort of speed it up maybe, or to assist and perhaps bring additional resource in. But ultimately, most problems are caused, a lot of problems are caused by a lack of understanding of other people, or lack of trust. And that's because the conversations that are being had within that team are not healthy conversations.
Right.
So easier said than done, but you need to break it down with understanding what the problem is, and then putting a plan together to slowly but surely address the problems that each individual is raising, and get the right people talking together and getting them to understand other people's points of view and why they think or behaving in the way in which they are. I mean, that's not the be all and end all, but that's the starting point.
And I see, as you answer that question, what comes to me is that you're in the center of this, so to trust yourself to do that. I know that seems like an obvious point, but
the other point is, you've got to lead by example, right? I mean, if you're saying to your team, for example, we need to have honest conversations, then you need to take on board any, comments about yourself.
Right. Okay.
That's really important. And then act on them, do something about it. And there's loads of things in business that you can do that elicit trust. If someone speaks to you confidentially, then it's confidential.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I've never once, imparted any information that was given to me confidentially by any member of my team I've ever worked with, ever. And just an example, but that in itself means that people know they can have a conversation with you 100%. And they're safe. It's not going to get out.
Yes.
If I think there's value in that person who's just told me that information, talking with that person, I will first ask their permission and explain why I think a conversation is worthwhile. Do you mind me sharing what you said about X?
Yes.
And only then will I then impart the information, just as an example.
That makes a lot of sense. That's valuable. So you through running your businesses, obviously, because of, you know, financially, and, you know, you were talking about success earlier, because you've grown your resources with regards to, you know, your experience and now your understanding of how to grow something, where you live and what you've created technologically, you know, the teams around you and your networks. You have a lot of resources now, that you've worked hard to create. But if you can just give us an idea of how do you leverage your resources to make the most impact? So if you can give us some advice on, there are lots of people out there in the world, as you know, who have sold their businesses, or who have some funds, or who have time, or any resources, and they're really wanting to use them wisely and create impact. And so what's your advice and what's your experience about how to leverage the resources that you've created? What's the best way? Because we've only got one life. What's the best way for us to create a big impact?
I think, you know, leveraging your resources for me is about getting the biggest bang for your buck. And I don't say buck necessarily in monetary terms, not literally money. It could be your time, it could be amplifying your message. Yes. But you want to have a big impact for your limited resources, right? Whether that is time or whatever it might be. I guess there's two ways you could think about it. Well, one is I think it's about facilitating others, right? If you can provide knowledge or tools that help others to help others, then you're going to have a bigger impact. You're going to amplify your message, because it's not just going to one person or one group of people. It's going to be, you know, it's going to be amplified because of the very nature. And equally, if you're able to inspire others, then your message will spread. And I think the other way of thinking about it is, you know, you can bake something into what you're already doing. So, for example, we launched an initiative called Trees for Degrees study, where we plant trees to compensate for the carbon emissions of the flights that the international students that we help take. You know, the very nature of what we do entails flights. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. So what can we do to help mitigate that and hopefully on scale? So it's something that we've bolted on to something we're doing already. You know, we're already talking to the students, so we can impart that message. And what I hope is that over time, not only will we plant millions of trees, but we'll also get the message out to, you know, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students, not only about what we're doing, but, you know, what the organization we're working with, who you kindly introduced me to, Plant for the Planet, what they're doing with their incredible initiative and ambition to plant 1 billion trees. So, you know, we're helping in our way to push that message out, to help, you know, Plant for the Planet get their message out, in turn to create this, hopefully create this unbelievable ambition.
Yes, you mentioned earlier as well around, you know, well, you just mentioned it as well. I think you mentioned it in two different ways throughout us talking, about bringing it into what you already do. And so I'm interested in, because you mentioned this value of discipline, or, you know, earlier, and I'm interested in your value and your self-discipline of working hard, you mentioned earlier. That's, I guess, very, very important with a limited amount of time that we have on the planet and in our businesses, that you think about, well, you've got a great vehicle, which you have, that you've worked hard to create. Now, how can you add value through that vehicle, like you've done with Plant for the Planet, for the students in helping them go to university? Is just, yeah, I can see why that leverages and itself, you know, as it builds. Yeah. Do you actually have a process of, you know, when you get all these different ideas, Chris, because you can help, you know, You know, there's lots of people, I'm sure, that knock on your door, and lots of great causes all over the world. You know, when you look at it from a philanthropic perspective, is how do you stay disciplined to what will leverage most? You know, and in your life, how do you stay disciplined to running money or running study rather than getting involved in lots of different things? Can you just give us a quick idea of, you know, what's your advice on staying disciplined? How do you do that? Is it a process you go through in your head, or is it just who you are or your work ethic? Is there something you do that helps you stay disciplined? Because I think the reason why I asked the question is, right now there's so much noise and there's so much confusion and there's so many youngsters that have 10,000 ideas. And I think success comes from working at something, being creative enough and flexible. If it's not working, yes, change it. But it's about discipline for me, really.
So, yeah, well, I think there are a few questions in there, but
yeah,
in terms of, yeah, focusing on the right stuff, shall we say, I think it's all about prioritizing. Well, actually, step one, it's all about knowing what you want to focus on.
Right.
Right. You've got to have a plan and know where you're heading. Otherwise, the chances of getting there are pretty damn slim, you know. So I think that's step one. But assuming that you have a strategy using whatever methodology you might adopt, in order to get there as quickly as possible, all you can do is prioritize, you know. And I mean, and that is every step of the way. So everything from prioritizing what you want to deliver in the next year. These are the most important things that we need to do as a business. Right.
Yes.
Okay. What does that mean for this quarter? Right. Got that. What does that mean for this month? What does it mean for this week? Right. What does it mean for my priorities today? And in my business now, I think I almost obsess about this. Everything is about prioritizing. You know, is it going to meet our objectives, what we want to deliver as a business, and what's going to have the biggest bang for our buck? You know, do I need to reply to those emails now, or do I need to crack on and review this document so that one of my colleagues can crack on with what they're doing? You know, yes. Everything boils down to priority. And the mistake that I've definitely made, and probably still do make in abundance, is that as humans, we love to focus on the fun stuff, right? Yes. The shiny, the new, the things that are just in our sweet spot of enjoyment. Those are the things we love to spend time on. And those generally are things that get done first. But they're not necessarily, and very rarely are, the things that are the most important or the most urgent. And that's the trick, is to take a step back and go, right, I know I really want to do this, but this is going to have the biggest impact. Therefore, I'm going to start with that. Right. And that's what I do each day in terms of my workload. And that's how we operate as a business. You know, yes. we use a system, a structure called OKRs. I know Google used them. I don't know whether they originally introduced them. It's called objectives and key results. And it's just one of many, many ways in which you can clearly define your objectives in the business and then make sure that everybody in the business is working towards those objectives. Right. I think you asked another question as well, which is more on the philanthropic side, about, I think it's something around knowing where to, you know, invest your money, or, you know.
Yes, and your time. Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, it's really, I mean, you've given us some great advice there as to how we focus, you know, and it's wrapped up in the same question, in that, you know, there are so many different things you can focus on with your money or with your time, your resources. And when you look at the world, there's so many great projects out there. As a philanthropist, how do you now choose as to where you spend your time and your money? Yeah,
I'll be honest, it's something I struggle with, you know, and I think the danger is you want the money that you're going to donate to have the biggest impact possible. And the danger is that you become a bit paralyzed and you end up hoarding the money, waiting to get the perfect project.
Yes.
And it's a mistake, because it's the same in business. You're better off moving forward and doing something than getting paralyzed and doing nothing because you're looking for perfection.
Yes.
And I'm guilty of this myself. You know, I don't think you know, my wife and I don't impart the money we have from our you know, our fund quickly enough, I don't think, because we are probably overly cautious about where we put the money. So it's a constant struggle. And as for how we choose, I mean, you know, there's 101
hundreds of things. Yes.
Yeah, there's lots of things to consider, but it's difficult. And I'll be honest, I don't really have the answer. I'm just conscious that I'm too slow at times.
And Chris, just to ask you, is there, I know that you've worked hard, obviously, throughout years on yourself. Is there one or two people in the world that you admire most that have guided you? Or is there just loads of different resources from books and documentaries and what have you, and people around you that have inspired you?
Apart from yourself, Craig.
Thank you.
Taking you out the list. I mean, I would say predominantly the latter. I think when you're open to new ideas and new ways of thinking, you pick things up from everybody, you know, throughout your life, and that's people you know, friends, colleagues, you know, books, podcasts, you know, things like, you know, TED. I'm a big fan of TED. All these sort of things culminate, and you learn nuggets from numerous different sources. I mean, if you were to push me on one individual, I wish it was some wonderful world leader, but Seth Godin springs to mind.
Great marketeer, yes.
So yeah, he's an American author, entrepreneur, teacher, I think he calls himself. But I remember reading one of his books, Purple Cow, a few years after I started the business, and it was like a window onto a new world, a new way of thinking. You know, the book focuses on, you know, how do you stand out in our industry, and you do it by creating something remarkable. But the way in which he wrote it and the ideas he had, it was something that I hadn't really read before. And the guy's prolific. You know, he's written over 20 books. Actually, it reminds me, I think there's 2 that I haven't read, so I must get onto that. He's a wonderfully engaging speaker, like yourself, Craig. Prolific blogger, podcaster, and in that sense, he's inspirational as well, because he just throws out so much, and it's a gift for anybody who wants to spend the time to absorb it. It's there, you know. And I just find him really, really interesting, and I always learn something whenever I listen to him.
Being a lifelong learner. And so if there was one piece of advice that you could give to non-for-profit organizations, or indeed profit-driven organizations, what would you've given so much over the last 45 minutes. I'm interested in what do you feel is the one piece of advice that's most important that you'd give to anybody who's a leader in a business or a leader in a non-for-profit organization? I know there's lots, but
yeah, I think
trust was huge, wasn't it? That was huge for me in listening to you talk about that.
I think you've got to have a direction. You've got to know where you want to arrive. You know, you've got to know where your destination is, and you've got to make sure that everybody around you understands what that looks like as well.
Yes.
But you know, I think day to day trust is key, and I think I suppose technically it's not essential, but it really helps if you care about what you're doing.
Yes.
You know, it is easy. It is possible to be successful in an area where you don't have the passion, but it's 10 times easier when you do care.
Yeah.
Because there's an underlying drive to make it happen.
Yeah.
That goes way beyond the mechanics of day to day.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think for me, it's integral, from what you've said about your values. That, and it's interesting talking about your analytical and creative mind, but I think, you know, you've talked about trust and you've talked about drive and you talked about hard work, but I mean, that underpins, and what I'm learning more and more in my life is what underpins all of this is values, is the values that you impart. And so, Chris, I want to ask you about 90 other questions, but I want to thank you so much for your time and your energy, and being such a giving person, and helping me so much. But thank you very much for your time today. It's been great talking to you.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And yeah, thank you for some really tough questions. They were really interesting.
It's a pleasure.
Took me out of my comfort zone.
Thank you so much, Chris.
No problem, Craig.
Thank you.